All right, everyone, we're live. Welcome to today's stream. I'm joined by Patricia Nonis, that vegan lawyer you may also know her as, and she has a very spicy take that I'm sure many of you will want us to get into today. So, Pat, you recently wrote an article on Substack, was it? And it had quite an interesting title that I think would trigger quite a lot of people, vegans, or people against colonialism, as most people are, because you wrote an article on there saying that why we should colonize the ocean. Now we're going to get into this today. Before we do that, did you just want to briefly introduce yourself, Pat, and just for anyone who's unfamiliar with who you are, and tell us what you do with regards to like veganism and animal rights and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. I don't know if it's a spicy take. I think it's quite logical, but that's something we can get into in
Sure.
a couple of minutes. So I'm Pat. I'm a lawyer from Sydney, Australia. I've begun my PhD. I'm writing on constitutional law and animals, specifically developing a constitutional legal theory for non-human animals.
Mhm. Now, the term colonialism or colonize, it brings up, for obvious reasons, a lot of negative connotations. Um, what does it mean? And we've even got a comment here asking this. What does it mean to colonize the ocean? Tell us exactly what you mean by this and why we should do this to the ocean.
Yeah, sure. First, let's talk about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean what white people did to Aboriginals in the country I grew up in, Australia. So
Hmm.
I think colonization has a specific definition when people talk about it in those terms, and it's immediately associated with that history. But colonization can just mean occupation. It can just mean monitoring a certain area. It doesn't have to mean let's rape and murder the beings living in this land, which we're going to now take over.
Hmm.
And taking over and dominion doesn't have to mean that either. It can mean protection. It can have a lot of positive connotations to it, which is obviously, as an animal rights advocate, how I'm using it when I talk about colonizing the ocean. If people want to find that triggering or insensitive, I think they need a more open-minded, objective view of the English language and not hold like certain meanings into such a narrow definition. It's the same with the use of the word Holocaust
Yeah.
or intervention, or things like that, that immediately have this negative connotation when that's not how the word is able to be used. It can be used in a variety of ways.
Would any part of this colonizing the ocean idea, though, would it involve killing in any way? Because there has been this argument recently that's been injected into vegan spaces about killing predators and stuff like that in order to prevent suffering to prey animals. Would the idea of colonizing the ocean involve that? Because you said you didn't. It's not about committing Holocaust in the ocean
Mm.
or anything like that. Or would you think there could be ways we could navigate this and not have to do this?
Yeah, the specific policies I'm proposing, if I were to talk to you about my ideas, which is what I'm doing on colonizing the ocean, it wouldn't involve killing or murdering animals or anything like that. I understand the argument for killing predators by Avi and Isaac and various other people. Um, I understand the validity of it. That's not the policy I'm proposing with colonizing the ocean. So there's been other ways around this problem of wild animal suffering. So we could separate species, we could monitor the borders. I would have no problem going into a jungle and um, shooting shooting animals with anesthesia to um, separate them and put them in different areas. That's very doable. We're doing things now like occupying Mars, and Elon Musk is trying to get people to Mars, but we can't help animals. Like that's looked at as too unreasonable. I
Mm,
think it's kind of bullshit. Like I don't think this whole idea to help wild animals is. I don't think it is hard to achieve, and I don't think it's technologically hard either. All we really need to do is go in there, like send the army or the military, have a well
yeah.
thought out plan, separate these animals, and make sure they're in livable environments. It's really not hard to do. And I think as animal rights advocates, we have a moral responsibility to talk about this if we care about the suffering of animals. So I strongly disagree with people like Francione in academia who say we should leave wild animals alone. I strongly disagree with David Rams, who won't talk about it at all. Like I think that's a betrayal to animals. I don't think because animals are harmed from natural causes as opposed to human engineered causes, it's not our business somehow. The cause doesn't matter. The suffering is what matters, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it would be interesting to get David's take on this in a video, because from what I gather, while he doesn't want to discuss the idea of killing predators publicly, I don't think he would have a problem with discussing how humans could intervene in nature to prevent wild animal suffering. Or have you heard something different from Rams
Well,
about
the podcast I've seen him speak about this, he said he would never ever talk about wild animals in general. He didn't just refer it specifically to killing predators and his disagreement with Avi and Isaac. He said that
Yeah.
he would never ever talk about wild animal suffering, which I think is insane. Like, I don't think that's the right thing to do if you're interested in defending the interests of animals. And the reasons he gives aren't good either. Like, he says, it makes us look bad. It's like an optical reason. So does that mean there's some threshold for talking about veganism? Like, if veganism looked some kind of bad, he wouldn't want to do it. Like, I don't think, not just him, like, people give these reasons for not talking about wild animal suffering. No one's going to take to it. We're going to look crazy. It's like, we already look crazy. Well, advocating for animal rights, that's not a reason to.
Yeah, because with regards to the optics stuff, I do understand that with regards to specifically the killing predators thing. I do believe that can make vegans look crazy if we take that on as part of the vegan movement. With regards to just generally, policing nature, so to speak, and actually talking about preventing wild animal suffering, yes, it may make us look quote unquote crazy, but no more to a certain extent than say we look crazy for not eating honey or something like that. I don't think it's such a bad look. And
No, but like my whole thing is looking crazy is not a reason to not do something. So if that is the reason to not talk about killing predators or to not talk about or anything, I don't think that's a valid reason. Like, it matters what is true and what is not true.
But what if that reason for looking crazy is, sorry, but what if I think there's a threshold, right? What if it could look so crazy that it would actually put people off from actually taking our arguments seriously about anything at all? Do you think there is a threshold with that regard?
There's a threshold for consequences, and it's an empirical claim. I don't think we have the evidence for knowing what is crazy enough to cause bad consequences. So any argument that rests on it's crazy because, and automatically assuming it's crazy and it's bad because it causes bad consequences, we haven't seen that. This is such a new movement. Like, why are we excluding not wild animals on the basis that we think it looks crazy and could somehow cause bad consequences? Evidence that we don't have yet. So I just think we should talk about wild animal suffering, whatever your view is on it, whether you support killing predators or not.
All right. Well, I will drop David a message and ask him why he doesn't want to discuss this publicly, if that indeed is the case, because it would be interesting to hear. Because I do think we should actually start discussing this. But we've got a question here from Flores that's just come in. Hey, Flores, he says, do you believe this endeavor should only start once animals have legal rights, or can it start any earlier and still work? What do you think, Pat?
Do you believe this endeavor should only start once animal has? Well, if we're going to wait for animals to have legal rights for anything, we're going to be waiting a really, really long time. So I think anything that can help animals now, it should be rights orientated. But if we can achieve something really, I don't support animal welfare, but just say we could achieve something substantially good without rights that protects wild animals, I would still support it. But that's hard to imagine because I think it does start with rights. So it's not really like, should we wait until we have rights? What we should be doing now should be aimed at getting animals' rights, if that makes sense. So it's not about waiting. Like, the rights is the objective. Sorry, it took me a while to get there, but that's the answer to the question. Does that make sense, George?
I think so. Yeah. We've got another question here from Pickle Twitch. This is about the whole threshold thing, about discussing ideas that seems crazy. So in this question, they're talking about killing predators, but this could just be we could just talk about the ocean colonizing thing here as well. So what if us advocating for killing predators, or indeed colonizing the ocean, is the difference between the world going vegan at some point and not going vegan at some point? So basically, Pat, if there was if basically that very argument itself could be the difference between people actually taking the argument seriously enough, such to the extent that they go vegan, do you think we should say, yeah, okay, we won't discuss this? Or do you think stuff should still be discussed, even if we would have like a carnist world for slightly longer?
So is he saying if we don't talk about wild animals in this hypothetical world, the world will be vegan?
Yeah, let's say the world hypothetically says, I would go vegan, but this idea of policing nature is just fucking insane. So I'm just going to carry on eating animals. And they weren't being disingenuous by saying that. They genuinely meant it. Would you say, okay, fuck it, we'll put this whole nature stuff aside for now, just so the world can go vegan? Or would you say, no, guys, like, we need to actually discuss this because it's true and because it's right, regardless of the consequences on farmed animals?
Yeah, it depends on the consequences of what we can do after. If the argument is, let's put this on hold for 3 months and then the world becomes vegan in 3 months and then we can talk about wild animal suffering, then I think that's a reasonable request. But if we can
Mm,
never ever talk about wild animal suffering, I don't even really understand the point then, because yes, the world will become vegan and there's no farm animal suffering, but there's still a shitload of wild animal suffering.
yeah,
So yeah, it depends on whether I'd be hard for me to agree to an argument which excludes wild animals forever. But like for a temporary pause, okay, and then we're vegan, that's great. Okay, now that everyone's stopped being insane with farm animals, we can talk about wild animals. But I think realistically, we need to do it collectively. Otherwise,
yeah.
it's just discrimination against wild animals for being harmed by natural
Mm.
causes that they have no control over.
Do you think a lot of vegans are speciesist in this regard, in that they don't want to talk about wild animal suffering, or they just say, oh, we shouldn't intervene in nature? Do you see that as a speciesist argument?
I think it could be a form of speciesism. It's almost like I think it's a certain ideology to do with nature, and I know we're going to talk about the natural fallacy in a moment,
Hmm.
but I think from birth we're drilled with certain ideas, and I really think one of them is that nature is good, and it comes from both the left and the right. It's like this sick fetish that they have for nature, whether it's
Mm.
because it's aesthetically pleasing or they've just been told that what's natural is good. They're seeing, in a way, wild animals as a part of that. So when a tiger rips open a deer or something like that, it's not as bad as when a person shoots a deer. But to the deer, it's exactly the same thing, possibly worse, because a bolt to the head is less painful than being ripped from limb to limb or being eaten out by parasites or starving to death or freezing to death.
Yeah. So, what do you think then of this statement that I hear a lot of people make, saying we shouldn't play God whenever we talk about wild animal suffering and intervening in nature? What do you make of that when they say we shouldn't play God, Pat?
I think they're the equivalent of people saying we shouldn't stop Hitler because that's playing God.
Yeah.
Like if you're not going to play God as a good ethical person, and I think both me and you are, and most vegans at least try to be,
Yeah.
then let me just play God with animals' lives. Playing
Yeah.
God is not inherently a bad thing. It depends on what your values are. Like that's one of the stupidest arguments, along with the natural fallacy and things that we've been led to believe that playing God is a bad thing. Yeah, it is if you're going to destroy and humiliate people and animals. But if you're going to help them, then it's probably one of the best things you could do for yourself and for other living beings.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see the whole playing God thing as anything other than a speciesist argument, because we do play God with a child dying of cancer.
Yeah,
We when you have a child dying of cancer, the the natural thing to do would just be to let them die. It's the circle of life. It's nature, right? But no, what do we do instead? We put them in a hospital bed. We link them up with chemotherapy, with chemicals and everything, and we actually take unnatural measures to save their lives. That's playing God, and good. That's what we should do. So put it this way: if God does exist, whoever this God is not doing a good job of stopping the suffering on this planet. So humans do need to play God. We do need to save children dying of God's will of cancer. We do need to stop the suffering in nature, I think, as well. So I generally am on board with you with this argument. I guess the main problem is it all just hot air? Like, what would this look like? How would this work? When are we actually going to do it? Or is this just about getting the ball rolling, getting the conversation started for you?
I think for me at this stage, it's just about getting the conversation started. I think a lot of things seem unachievable until someone starts it and achieves it. And I don't think something being difficult to obtain is a reason to not do it. And I think the more important something is, Elon Musk kind of says, sorry, I've mentioned him like twice now. Now I look like a fangirl, which is embarrassing, but
you are
whatever.
a fangirl. That's right.
Yeah, I know. So it's like, whatever, openly a fangirl. The more important something is, the more you should do it, and the more that odds shouldn't matter, probabilities shouldn't matter. And I think me and you both live our lives like that by virtue of being vegan. It doesn't matter to me that the world might not go vegan. I'm going to do it out of principle and hope,
Yeah.
and fight to the death that it will happen. But I'm not going to not pursue something, especially if it's important, because the odds are against my favor.
When do you realistically see that something like this could happen? Humans actually going into the ocean and ensuring that the suffering there is kept to a minimum. And how physically, what would it look like? Are you talking about there would be like walls in the ocean? Would there be massive glass tanks? Would the ocean just be a massive fucking aquarium? Like how would this physically look? And when do you think this could actually realistically happen if people take this on board?
What's that word? I think it's like Atlantis or something. It's some underwater world where
Oh yeah.
I can't remember. What's it? It's not Atlantis, it's something else. Look, we have submarines now. We have certain cameras that can go super, past the livable depth of where humans and most animals can be. There's a recent project, I forget who exactly is starting it, but it's to attach cameras to a lot of different, like really tiny cameras to different species, so we can learn more about them and how to help them. People in academia and other policy kind of places, there's some advocacy there for just providing basic intervention, nowhere near what really needs to happen, but vaccinations and things like that for wild animals and very bad diseases. So we're slowly seeing shifts here and there. If you look up wild animal suffering on Google, there is an organization dedicated to educating people about it. There's thinkers like Oscar Horta. I had him on my channel recently, and he's quite a well-known professor in Spain. And his whole thing is talking about wild animal suffering. And he provides really interesting kind of empirical evidence showing why they're destined to fail. It's to do with the way they breed and the way they come into life in nature. And like the empirical part is there. We know that nature is mostly suffering. It's just how we're going to address it. I think the world will probably become vegan before wild animal suffering is properly addressed. And the world isn't going to become vegan in 5 years, but maybe in the next, 50 years or something like that.
We've got a question here that I think I'm too dumb to understand, but I want to see if you can get the gist of this. So Isaiah Holland says, what about using genetic engineering and other methods?
I agree with the person. I agree. I know what they're talking about. Genetic engineering and ecology, species culture to change. Yeah, that's the only real solution, which is what I was going to get to next. It's not just providing. It's not even really what I'm saying to go into the ocean, colonize it. It's to genetically change the DNA of certain species, including our own, so that it's more difficult for them to suffer and experience diseases. And there's ways you can do that. They're trying to do that with malaria at the moment. There's a technology called gene drives, genetic engineering. They're kind of related. That's the only way to do it from the bottom up, scientifically.
Tell us about this, because this is completely new to me, and I don't think I've heard about this before. It maybe rings a little bell. Maybe like David Pierce has mentioned something about we could modify the human genome or something. What does this mean? What would this look like?
So I'm not a scientist, so I can't tell you specifically exactly, but basically it's to do with modifying your genetics. So you'll prevent certain diseases and certain things that are bad things that are naturally going to happen to your body, like aging, like weaknesses. So one day suffering and maybe even death might be a thing of the past. And this is a whole area of research that actually is getting like quite a bit of traction in contemporary times. And the whole idea is just to genetically modify people and animals so that they might be able to live forever one day without suffering.
Is there though an issue with the idea of living forever? Could this not be potentially catastrophic for overpopulation and stuff like that of any species, especially humans? Could this just not be a terrible idea to make us immortal or to make certain animals immortal?
I mean, anything could be great or terrible, another kind of empirical leaning, but I don't really buy this idea from what I understand of population and land use that there's going to be not enough land or not enough resources. even if you look at Australia, the population is concentrated to specific cities, and we have this whole massive island that's not used, and then we have like certain cities around the continent. So I think it's more about using the resources properly and being more responsible with them and making more areas livable, which is not going to happen if nature's around all the time.
Yeah, it's just, I think with Australia, I could kind of see a case that you could definitely fit more people in there. The UK, I'm very much not convinced. We're a very densely populated country, right? There's like 67 million of us here, very small little group of islands, and so much stuff here. The services and stuff are overflowing and stuff as they are. Like you've been to London before, you get on the tube and stuff at rush hour. It's just like crazy. We've got hospitals overflowing and stuff, massive waiting times for cancer appointments and stuff like that. But then again, if we've altered the human genome, maybe these things like cancer waiting times, maybe this obviously couldn't be relevant. But as for being cramped on transport and stuff like that, yeah, I can't see the idea of immortal, long-lasting life as anything other than a bad idea for humans at the moment. But the stuff about at least altering our genome so that we can avoid certain diseases does sound interesting. You said they're working on the technology for this. When do you see that coming into play? Like altering our genomes such to the extent we might not even be able to get malaria, for example. Like when do you see that happening?
I mean, it's a similar question to when are we going to address, wild animal suffering? It's kind of anyone's guess. Or when are we going to develop AGI? And scientists have it put at 10 years, some say 50 years. I think it's within that mark, 10 to 50 years. I don't see it taking a whole other century because things are progressing quite fast in terms of technology. But in terms of morality, that's a different question, whether we're going to use it responsibly or not, which is what you hinted at. So we could come up with all these like wonderful different scientific tools, but if they're used irresponsibly, that's not going to be good. Keep in mind with your objection about human population with respect to a place like London, having this technology doesn't mean that we're going to have exactly identical policies for Australia than to London. It might be different, in terms of how that's regulated. And if there's absolutely no space, it'd be stupid to have a rule that says, oh, actually, let's just keep doing this and make humans immortal. There could be a limit on how many people, etc. So I don't think that necessarily stops the idea of immortality. And maybe it should be reserved for ethically responsible people and get rid of the trash. I wouldn't be against that either.
Now, with regards to the genome stuff, just again, now you mentioned about phasing out certain diseases and stuff like that. What about altering it so that we couldn't suffer or feel pain, or like zebras couldn't suffer or feel pain? Is that a valid concept? And is this something that you would, I mean, this is probably something I would implement if we did have the technology, but is this something you would see as a good idea? And do you think this is realistic?
I think this is probably more on David Pearce's realm. So I think he uses the idea of nanotechnology to change the way your brain functions and the way the different neural networks are organized so that you can't suffer. I'm not sure about absolutely no suffering. I'm a little bit of a stoic myself. I think a certain amount, not okay. So it's uncontroversial to me that the worst kinds of suffering should be eliminated from the world. That's just not, I think people that don't agree with that are psychos. Yeah. But a certain amount of suffering, you go to the gym, you work out, it burns a little bit, but you feel good afterwards. I'm not necessarily against. I think someone like David would probably still be against that. And he's got all these interesting answers to those type of objections. Like he says, when we're really the most productive and when we really feel good, like there's not much suffering involved. So it could be that we could just learn to be stronger and more productive as happier individuals. But my limitations on my own experience, like I haven't seen that. I've seen like I need to suffer a little bit to achieve something. But I'm not. He also gives another interesting hypothetical that sort of convinced, I'm a bit agnostic on this. This hypothetical sort of made me more lean towards no suffering at all. And he said if we found a species of alien, like a super intelligent species that just had no suffering whatsoever, no one would ever say, let's inject them with a bit of suffering so they can really understand what a good life is. You know what I'm saying? So that hypothetical pushed me a bit on the side of like, oh, okay, maybe it is better to work towards a world with no suffering at all.
And the whole thing about, because we've titled this discussion colonizing, the vegan girl who wants to colonize the ocean, but it goes beyond the ocean, right? You want to actually intervene in nature in general, like on land and everything. Is the scope of this just too massive that it might be just such an unrealistic idea that it's not even worth talking about? It might be so utopian that it sounds crazy, right? It's like, we're going to stop the suffering in the ocean, the jungle, the air, under the ground. Like, does it just become too crazy once we factor in all these areas?
I mean, I'm writing a constitutional legal theory for animals. I specialize in coming up with unrealistic ideas. So, and we're like the whole issue with that objection is we're already interfering in nature in totally destructive and apathetic ways. We're already doing it to such a level that people don't even recognize it now. When there's a road that just runs through a forest, no one sees that as an interference because the road has always been there. So, and they look at me as crazy for suggesting we do it altruistically. It's like, no, you're crazy for accepting normalized violence. This is how you're crazy for not being vegan and, funding the animal holocaust.
Do you know what? I think that's a great way of looking at things, right? It's like, because I was just saying a moment ago, is it crazy the idea that we'll be, we're going to be all in these places, just stopping this here and preventing that there? We're already in those places managing to fuck them up. That's what humans are doing. Like, I mean, look at the fishing industry, like trillions per year.
Yeah.
Why could we not just do the opposite? Humans have the capability to do anything in any areas they want, whether it's to cause suffering or prevent suffering. If we're in all these places at once, fucking them up, the air, under the ground, the water, the jungle, the forest, the mountains, why could we not be in all these places at once doing the opposite of fucking them up and actually helping these places, right?
Yeah, so you've just really persuasively argued against the precautionary principle, which is what most people say. They say, "Oh, let's not interfere because we might cause harm." It's like, sweetheart, we're causing harm anyway, so you might as well take a chance. Our position is taking the chance for, that there's the chance of success rather than the certainty of failure. Because if you take the precautionary principle, there's a certainty that wild animal suffering will continue, mass violence will just continue. But if you take our position, at least there's, a slight chance that it could succeed, which is better than the certainty of the fail.
Now, let's talk about the capacity of marine animals to suffer, because I think a lot of people, most carnists for sure, and even a certain proportion of vegans, I don't think are fully convinced that marine animals have as much of a capacity to suffer as land animals. Why do you think that conception exists? Why do you think people think that about marine animals?
Yeah, I've thought about this for a little while, for a couple of years. One aspect is the celebration of violence when it comes to something like fishing. And a lot of people have very fond memories of fishing trips with their dad or with the guys or whoever. And it's really difficult for them to see animals as victims, probably even more so than meat and dairy, because they don't actually see the victims there. And then, they're eating the burger and then you show them and they get really butthurt. You don't often get the same response with respect to marine life and sea animals. And I think a lot of it is to do with being in the ocean, being out on boats, going fishing with your friends, and they're actually hooking an animal in the face, a sentient animal in the face, and not seeing it as violence because they've been programmed from whatever. Maybe in another culture, not the West, they see it as more violence. I'm not sure. But I think that's one aspect. The other aspect of it is more kind of basic. I mean, we're land animals. It might be easier to understand or care about land animals a bit more rather than fish who look nothing like us. So those are kind of the two reasons I've come up with. I think the first one to do with this cultural kind of celebration that comes with violence against fish is probably more accurate.
Do you also think it's to do with the fact that they don't talk, quote unquote? They don't make noise like a dog or a cat. Well, if you accidentally tread on a dog's paw, they yelp. You hear these horrific videos of pigs screaming in gas chambers and stuff in documentaries like Dominion and stuff. But then you watch, I don't know, like Seaspiracy, for example, and when you see like a fish hooked, they're flapping around on the deck, which we
Yeah.
vegans can kind of see. It's like they're clearly like in distress,
Yeah.
but they're not making any noise. And I think if they yelped like dogs or if they squealed like pigs, I think people would actually be a lot more empathetic to the suffering of marine animals. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. A lot of people see even pigs look similar to dogs. They have four legs. People have pigs as pets, and it's a very similar kind of relationship. Whereas you could never really have that with fish unless you have unless you're working at fucking somewhere like SeaWorld and you have that kind of relationship where you can touch them and understand their vocals and things like that. So it's kind of an epistemic problem as well, like this problem around knowledge and how we understand things that you just raised. I completely agree. That's definitely one of the factors.
So how much can marine animals suffer? Can they suffer to the extent that land animals can, or do you think there's like a trivial difference in suffering, or is there a massive difference in suffering? What do you think?
I don't think there's any difference in suffering. If anything, I've read some species of fish have so much in their nervous system that can actually suffer more. One study I swear I read that could actually suffer more physical pain than humans just because of the way their nervous
Wow.
system works. If I find that, I'll send it to you. And animals like dolphins and orcas, they're some of the smartest animals on the fucking planet. I think they're smarter than some humans. I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw recently, a lot of my work deals with animal resistance, and a lot of that comes from big predators, who very controversial in this area, obviously. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of attacking humans. They're sinking ships in the Pacific. I saw the other day sinking yachts and teaching other orcas to do the same. So I think a lot of marine animals are some of the most intelligent on Earth.
You know, the weird thing is though, you mentioned about a species of fish a moment ago that could suffer more than humans can, and
If I'm
what it,
remembering correctly, yeah.
yeah. Now, it's actually it actually could be the case, as Richard Dawkins said. You know, Richard Dawkins is a masterful expert on biology, evolutionary biology, and nervous systems. He says it could be the case that less intelligent species who are sentient and have a nervous system could well suffer more than humans.
Mm.
Because when we feel pain, that's our body's way of saying, don't do that again. Right. So, like, say we sit on a pin or something like that, we get a signal to our brain saying, stand up because there's something like penetrating your body right now, kind of thing. And you need to
Yeah.
take that out because that
Yeah.
could harmful for you. You could get diseases or infection or whatever. But the thing is, we don't really need that as much as animals do. We know not to stick our hand in a fire, right? We don't so much need. I've never stuck my hand in a fire, right? I've never been burnt, but I know not to do it, right? Animals, however, because they're not as intelligent as humans, they would need some kind of signal to really say, you know, don't go in that fire, you will literally die, which you and I don't need. So that means their nervous system, sadly, it could be the case that animals, whether they're marine animals or land animals, could feel physical pain in a way that you and I can't even comprehend, because that's their body's way
Yeah.
of saying, do not do this at all costs, which you and I don't need as much as them. Have you heard of that theory proposed by people like Richard Dawkins?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of most of Richard Dawkins' work, not necessarily his views on animal rights, of which, like most people, are kind of moronic. But yeah, no, I have read that. I think it was in A River Out of Eden, or The Greatest Show on Earth, one of his books. He does talk about how animals are a bit more sensitive towards pain and might even be more sentient in some ways than we are. Maybe that's where I saw the study. I can't remember. But that's another thing we don't know so much. I was on NASA's website the other day looking at ocean explorers. They have a section on this. And the conclusion in all the interviews is just, oh, yeah, we don't really know that much about the ocean. You know, I've read people say that we know more about the universe and outer space than we do about the ocean. So
Oh my God.
I know it's terrifying. And animal rights aside, there's great intellectual and technological benefits to learning more about the ocean. How do we know?
Wow.
How do we know a fucking massive sea monster is not just going to come up and eat everyone? Like, we need to be aware of the places that we live.
I mean, the ocean is crazy when you think about that. Would I be right in saying there's more life in the ocean than there is on land, or would I be wrong about that?
I think there's probably more life in the ocean.
I think there's probably more large life, like animal life. I think there's definitely more animal life. As for but if you're talking about insects and stuff,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
something like quadrillions of insects in the ground, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe
Unless
more.
there's like deep sea bugs or something like and there's like quadrillions of them as well.
Yeah.
But animal wise, I think certainly the ocean just eclipses what we've got here on land. And how much of the Earth's surface is taken up by water? Is it something like 60%, 70% like
I
that?
thought it was more. I thought it was like 70, 75%.
Yeah. So I can see it, as crazy as it sounds, that yeah, maybe we do know more about space. Just because space, while as vast as it is,
Yeah.
there's not much in it as far as we can see. It's just a few
Yeah.
planets here and there, and the rest is just black, right? But the ocean,
It's
like,
dark matter and dark energy and things like that.
right,
Yeah.
the amount of species we haven't even come across in the ocean yet could be crazy. For all we know, there could be more species we haven't discovered
Yeah.
than there are, because we can only go. Do you know anything about how deep we can go down in the ocean now? Because obviously
I think
humans
it's
can't.
like 60. I looked this up recently. I think it was like 60 miles. How deep can we go in the? I think we can send cameras and shit. 35,876 feet.
And then below, anything below that, the pressure is just too much, and
Yeah,
any
you'll die.
camera would just shatter, kind of thing.
We might have cameras that can sustain it, but in terms of life, I don't think anyone can go lower than that, apart from the sea animals that are down there, if any. Yeah, the deep sea they call it.
We have another question here from Isaiah Holland. He says, do you agree that the existence of the central nervous system is the system that should quilt the vegan project together? Not sure I understand completely, but I don't
He's
know.
saying, like, how in the vegan movement, even in academia, the baseline for rights is sentience. I think central nervous system he's using to basically say consciousness and sentience is what should be the focus.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, you can answer. I have a weird take on this, but I'm gonna let you answer first.
Yeah, if you're talking about if there's a physical trait that gives a being rights, I would say it would be a central nervous system, because that is what gives rise to suffering and sentience, obviously, as well. But yeah, I don't know.
Slightly different to what he's asking. I think his question is more about emphasis and like a holistic view on this rather than what guarantees rights. I could be wrong. Personally, I think this is controversial, but I think there's too much focus on sentience. Like, I think most people know animals are sentient. I think it takes up a lot of time. My PhD, I'm glad, is not so focused on sentience. I don't deny any of the truth in that. Like, I agree with you. I think sentience is what should be the trigger for individual rights, or at least serious moral consideration. I don't know. I look at these other social justice movements, and it wasn't about. Everyone knows Black people was intelligent and conscious and sentient. It was more about. I guess it was a bit more political, and that's why
a very good point.
Yeah, and I just, when you see these really long arguments with people denying animal sentience, I just 99% of the time I don't believe them. I think they're just doing that because they're butthurt or they want to trigger the vegan. So I don't like to spend much time on it.
Well, just to counter your point, though, with regards to, like, I don't know, the slave trade, but the reason we do see that as bad, the reason any good person at least sees that as bad, is because the victims can suffer and feel pain and blah, blah, blah. It's not specifically like a political, if you're on the side of the good against what happened, it's not specifically a political pushback against it, just something like, oh, I oppose, I dislike white people or something like that. It does obviously come from a genuine place of empathy, because a great deal of suffering was involved. So surely there has to be, is there not at least a connection there?
Oh, I think it's super important, and I think it should be included. But from what I've seen, both in academia and in advocacy, I think there's like an over focus on it. And I think a lot of the times when the objection comes up that animals aren't sentient, I don't think those people are acting in good faith. And it's almost like a distraction. Like, let's have this 1 hour debate about science, also the so-called science of consciousness and sentience, so I don't have to take any accountability. Like, we're just going to have this really annoying long discussion about consciousness when everyone knows animals are sentient.
We've got another question here from Flores. He says, I don't see a reason to base all this on suffering. Isn't this contradictory to saying we should advocate for animals through rights and duties, aka deontological instead of utilitarian? What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with him. I think the thing with sentience is it does lead to this utilitarian way of thinking, and all the issue becomes on the capacity to suffer. And then that's how welfare comes in and says, oh, if we can reduce their suffering, then we can justify rights violations, or we can justify exploiting them. It leads to this line of thinking. And I'm not saying there's heaps of great animal rights activists that are focused on sentience and consciousness and would never do that. But if we're embracing that line of thinking as a whole, I think it opens up. And I think it has opened up. I think that's what happened. Animals are conscious, let's give them rights. Oh, no, actually, let's just give them welfare. Oh, okay. And then made things worse.
So here's the thing. Flores says in the second sentence here, isn't this contradictory to, the vegan message of saying we should advocate for animals through rights and duties? Well, the reason we ascribe rights to animals as vegans and separate them from plants is because they can suffer, though, right? So I would say that the fact that animals can suffer should grant them rights. So I do still see suffering as a key part of the vegan argument, even though, yes, it is rights-based and it's not just about suffering, because we don't want to get into welfareism territory. I do feel we could go into the whole, plants though thing or whatever it could be, which is obviously the carnist perception. If we just say it's not about suffering at all and it's just about, granting someone rights regardless of suffering, well, there has to be a someone there in the first place, i.e., a sentient being who is capable of suffering. Do you have any take on that?
I don't think we're kind of going around circles a little bit, because I don't think Flores or I, it's not Florence, it's Flores. I always get that wrong. Flores or I just disagree with the importance of sentience. I think he's more saying the emphasis on the capacity to suffer is a little bit detrimental, because you're not taking into account the full account of why rights exist in the first place. Because even without the capacity to suffer, even without preventing suffering, someone still has rights. I still have certain preferences. I have the right to vote. I have the right, the right to not be tortured is not the only right that's out there. I have a right to a good life. If I live in a liberal democracy, I have certain preferences that have nothing to do with suffering, and those should be acknowledged as my status as a rights holder. But when you only focus on suffering, it's quite reductionary.
Quite a deep philosophical one here from Isaiah. He says, do you consider yourself as taking a Kantian approach towards this project? Are you aware of Kantian philosophy?
Yeah, I know Kantian philosophy. Are you across it?
All I know about Kant is he just said something like the reason for doing something or not doing something is because if everyone thought that way, it would do this, or if everyone, that's the gist of it. But if you want to, you can probably explain it a lot better than me and then give your answer to anyone.
No, that was pretty much one of his principles. It's called the categorical imperative.
Okay.
If a rule is true, if it can be true for everyone, basically. I don't disagree with that. I don't really disagree with Kant on his moral principles. He just has really fucked up views on animals, but a lot of people did at that time and still have, there's a lot of so-called smart people today that have really fucked views on animals. But Kant was a deontologist. He was a very intelligent person outside animals. There's nothing I really strongly disagree with him on. I think he had this idea of kind of universal rights for everyone. I'm not sure that follows through in reality, just because of things like culture and dumb religions that exist. But in theory, there's nothing I really strongly disagree with Kant on, apart from his stance on animals, because he was a pretty moderate deontologist, I think. If there's some crazy view he has, then I'll totally take that all back.
Alpha Sophist asks you, what is your normative ethic?
I'm a moderate deontologist, or threshold deontologist. So should I explain what that is, or is that?
Yeah, explain what that is, because I think most people watching might not know about, the differences between certain philosophical terms like, deontology, utilitarianism, stuff like that. So explain.
Okay, so there's more than 4 branches of normative ethics, but there's 4 main ones. Utilitarianism, which is concerned with maximizing well-being or reducing suffering, depending on what branch you're looking at, or maximizing utility. And then there is deontology, which is concerned with rights, and there's consequentialism, which is concerned with outcomes or consequences. There's also branches like virtue ethics and moral particularism, which is less so well known. But to answer the question, I'm a threshold deontologist in that rights are my first priority, but I will allow rights violations if it can be shown that there's very good consequences that can follow. So a very simple example would be, I wouldn't agree to one person being sacrificed for 3 people, but I might agree for 3 billion people, because I think that would be kind of crazy to not.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for explaining that. You said about 5 minutes ago that Richard Dawkins has some disappointing views or something on animal rights. As far as I was aware, he completely agrees with all the vegan argument. He just says he doesn't have the strength to do it. Why? What had you heard?
Oh no, I think his views seem reasonable from what I've seen.
Right.
But I think so maybe it's not his actual views, it's his actions. But that is still a type of view. It's still a type of view on what you find acceptable in your own conduct. So in that sense, I kind of disagree with him, not on his general view on animal
Mm.
rights, which he has indicated that he's supported. I remember ages ago, back when Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, was based and not like a fucking pussy for whatever her name is, John Peterson's daughter. He made these really radical posts about eggs, and then Richard Dawkins got butthurt, and I remember strongly siding with Alex on that. And yeah, I just don't like the way he's kind of approached the issue. Like he was all fine being sympathetic with it, and then he didn't like it when he was called out for not aligning his views with his actions, which is what we should be holding people accountable to, regardless of whether they're famous scientists or not.
Do you reckon Dawkins might go vegan in his lifetime? He's getting pretty old now. He probably ain't got much long left, but do you reckon he could?
He has shown me no indication that he would take it seriously in terms of his actions. So I'm gonna say no. I don't like saying no and like closing people off, but I don't know. You got to give some evidence that you're taking something seriously. You know, even someone like Sam Harris, I wouldn't say no to because he's given very mixed kind of comments on that. So I'd still be open to him becoming vegan. But someone
Yeah.
like Dawkins, he just hasn't talked about it enough. I have no idea what he's actually doing. So I would say I'm not sure or no.
To be honest, I'm more confident that Dawkins would go vegan than Harris. I think Harris just says a load of waffle and makes a load of shit excuses, whereas Dawkins is just honest about it. Dawkins just admits he has no excuse.
I guess it's two annoying type of meat eaters, but I haven't seen that one would go vegan over the other. I can see like a preference for one over the other, but yeah, it remains to be seen. I would love it if they both just went vegan, and then I would apologize and take that all back. So
We have a great comment here. Dumb bitch, how can you colonize the ocean? Pat, I'll let you respond to that.
well, pretty effortlessly with the right amount of resources, money, military effort. I think it should be a real military government effort along with private companies and billionaires that would fund it.
Maybe Daddy Elon could get behind the old ocean colonizing.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like everyone's so obsessed with space, but they're not at all concerned about like the oceans that kind of keep the planet alive, which is strange to me. Or maybe that's why he wants to go to Mars because he knows we're fucked here. That would make a lot more sense.
I would love for Elon to go vegan. I think that would be huge. The problem is, I don't think he cares at all about animals. I've seen no indication from him at all that he cares about animal suffering, and he has, as far as I'm aware, conducted cruel experiments on monkeys and stuff for brain chips and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What do you know anything about Elon's position on animal rights and animal ethics at all?
He said extremely, extremely retarded things, and it's the only time I find him really stupid.
Yeah.
Like I like mostly I agree with what he says and even how he acts and what he does. Like I think he's quite a likable, charismatic guy and honest. I really like that about him too. But when it comes to non-human animals, I think he's not just not supporting it. I think he's actively sort of supporting the dairy industry, for example. He's really against people trying to close farms for the environment, which I agree. I don't think you should close anything for the environment, but I don't agree because the animals are being harmed, which he doesn't really seem to take into consideration. And he'll defend farmers in tweets and things like that and say, "Oh, this is stupid." You know, I think he said recently, "There's nothing wrong with, like we don't need to kill a few cows to save the environment or something like that." He totally doesn't get it, and he's proudly a speciesist, which is whatever. Like if people want to call themselves speciesist, I'm kind of okay with it. If you think humans are better than animals for whatever reason, and you give a proper reason, that's fine. But if your speciesism involves holocausting other animals, then you can be proud of humanity and love humanity without holocausting animals.
Yeah, 100%. We've got a good. This is an interesting one to discuss. We should try to make ocean life go extinct. What do you make to that idea? Just the idea that there can be no life in there, so no more suffering ever again at all. Because I see, I'm an ethicist, right? I do think like it's horrible that any animal at all just comes into existence, because what is their life, right? It's just like they exist, get chased around, suffer, and die. Would you support extinction of certain species or all species, or do you just think we should just try to better things instead while life exists in there?
So at the moment, we have at our liberty different options to go down. If one of those options is making paradise engineering, that's what we call it, to engineer paradise on Earth, that's the option we should take. If the option is eternal death and suffering forever, then death is preferable to that option. But those aren't the two options on the table. So I see no reason to take the view that we should make animals in the ocean go extinct. I find that a bit unhinged.
The whole paradise on Earth concept. I think I asked you. Do you watch Black Mirror?
Oh yeah.
Do you like that episode San Junipero?
I'm not across all the episodes. I haven't watched it for years, but my friend bought me the DVD set a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed most of the episodes.
There's a new season of Black Mirror out that's just dropped. I haven't seen any of the episodes yet, but one of the old episodes is called San Junipero, and it's kind of on this subject. I won't give too much away, but I think you might. I think you'll like it, given like the sort of discussions and stuff we're having today.
Yeah, and I've liked most of their stuff, so I'm sure I will. I'll be sure to Google it afterwards. I just want to remind people that what the life that humans have now is paradise compared to the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages wasn't that, it was far away, but in the scheme of things and how long humans have been on Earth, it's not that far away. If Lincoln was alive today, he would think he was in heaven. Like that's how good humans have it right now. So I don't see why we should not strive for the same thing for non-human animals. And this is what we achieved in such a short amount of time. If we do things responsibly, there's no reason why it couldn't be just like infinitely better than this.
Now, going back to this subject, the whole colonizing the ocean stuff. Now, obviously, you've written an article about it, but what some people might ask, what do you personally intend to do about this? Are you just trying to get like a conversation started here, or is there something that is there some kind of action you believe that you can take, like with your interest in law and stuff like that? Is there something you believe that you can personally do here?
I think sometimes in order to have a good idea become reality, we need to destroy bad ideas. And one of those bad ideas is environmental law and policy. So I think what any animal rights lawyer or writer or anything should be, or just activists should be conveying this idea that nature is not inherently good. It's causing a lot of suffering, including the oceans and the jungle and the wilderness. And it needs to be destroyed and transformed into something that's remotely livable for the beings that live in there. So that's the ultimate end goal, and I'll probably do it until I die. So I don't know if there's any specific policy or goal I'm after now. Everything's just aimed at that one objective.
How would you feed ocean predators if we were to colonize the ocean, so to speak? What would be your plan there?
Yeah, so I have another Substack article called Lab Meat for Lions. And in that article, I propose that what's really insane about this, that people laugh about it, is I'm pretty sure they've already started generating lab meat for humans who are not carnivores, or not natural carnivores. But people are scoffing at the idea of lab meat for actual carnivores. And that's how fucking narcissistic people are. And, no one really says anything when I point this out because it is just pure narcissism. Like, I like the taste of meat. So let's get lab meat from lions and tigers and eat carnivores, or lab meat from cows and eat cows, even though they're not actual carnivores. But it's technically feasible to do something like that for both land predators and ocean predators if we monitor the species responsibly. So I would say lab meat and like the end of animal suffering, especially farm animal suffering, I think is going to be a technological one. I think it's really important that activists like me and you kind of act as the moral backbone of this movement or this area. But I think ultimately what's really going to change things is changing the capital market, which is introducing lab meat and making it super accessible for the average person who is not very bright, not very smart, not very independent thinking, making it easier for them to access something that is cheap and easy.
I'm still trying to kind of work out how this would look and how it would be done, because the ocean is so vast that all these animals are just swimming like all over the place. Like, how would it be possible to like contain all these like certain species of animals in one area, like separate like the sharks from the tunas and separate the salmons from the octopuses and blah blah blah, and then just feed certain ones species specific diets. Like, how would we even manage to like round up all these animals in the first place? Or is this something just beyond our comprehension at the moment?
I mean, if you just when we like, it becomes easier to visualize when you visualize what we're currently doing. So I think globally we capture about 750,000 dolphins and millions more marine animals a year and kill them and whatever else. So there's no reason why we can't use similar technologies without the killing animals part, to temporarily, not euthanize them, put them to sleep, and then relocate them. So it's going to involve kind of separating boundaries in the ocean, and
Right.
that's a technological, challenge. But yeah, the way we interfere already, I'm surprised anyone thinks that this level of interference is ambitious. Like, look at what we already do. This is not that far off from what we're doing is not far off from what I'm actually proposing. It's mine's actually good for animals, and the others is actually bad.
Because we're coming to the end now, Pat. I thought we'll just keep it around an hour. Did you want to give like some kind of summarizing statement or closing statement on why we should A, intervene in nature, and B, quote unquote, colonize the ocean, and why the idea of colonizing is not always a bad thing in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think we should interfere with nature because I think the natural fallacy, or this idea that what is natural is automatically what is good, has been one of the worst ideas humanity ever came up with, along with carnism, Islamism, and every other horrible idea there is out there. I don't think colonization necessarily means rape and murder Aboriginal people and, non-whites. It can mean occupying land. It can mean monitoring. Dominion doesn't have to be something destructive. And yeah, I'm happy to chat or debate anyone about this. David Rams, whoever else wants to talk about it, is more than welcome to.
Yeah, everyone, give us a thumbs up in the chat if you want David Rams to to get talking about this. Rams, I'm calling you out, mate. So yeah, we'd definitely like to see him talk about this. I know he for sure.
Keep in mind, like I understand not wanting to debate certain people on this issue. Like, different people have different relationships with everyone. I understand that, but to completely shut down the topic of wild animal suffering, I think is a betrayal to animals, and I think you do need to be called out if you've said that as an animal rights activist. This is with the caveat that it's not saying he needs to debate predators or like anything else, but the general view that he's not going to talk about wild animal suffering, I think, is bad.
Yeah, 100%. I think David definitely should talk about that. So he won't mind me ribbing him a bit about this. So yeah, David, I hope that you do reconsider this and you do want to chat about this, because it could be interesting. And I know that he has some, he's a clever guy and he has some good opinions about stuff. So it would be good to hear him talk about this in a public space, because I do think we need to get the ball rolling on talking about wild animal suffering, because suffering is very, very important. And I think the world is so messed up. Life is so messed up. This prison that we and animals are born into, where there's just suffering everywhere. I think we have to, in our short time on this earth, do something at least to prevent. What you called nature some very interesting terms recently. I've heard you write on Instagram, Pat. How is it that you've referred to nature as recently on Instagram?
Oh yeah, I think it's a communist totalitarianism, like totalitarianist regime. I think it's like nature's holocaust. I don't see it much different from factory farming. I think it's hell on earth. Like, I can't describe how badly I hate it and would like to destroy it. So
I think, yeah, I saw you call it something like a totalitarian shithole or something like that.
Yeah, it is. It is. It has so many similarities with communism. Like, when you look at how environmentalists consider animals, a lot of the time it's how they benefit collectively. Like, they're not looked at as individuals, which is similar to communism. It's this idea that how is a collective benefiting society and not as individuals, which is another thing that goes against like what I deeply believe in, which is individual rights, and like having every individual, I think, should have the chance to flourish in their own capacities and in their own preferences. And you're absolutely not going to get that in communism or in nature.
Just before we head off, Pat, we'll just try and answer maybe one or two more questions. We've got one from Floris here. Floris says, I noticed Pat continues to say ending wild animal suffering, but we established this is the wrong terminology. Aren't uplifting wild animal rights or doing our duties to wild animals much better terms to use?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. The problem is, I don't think many people know that wild animals actually suffer. So I think that's why a lot of the wild animal suffering is more popular than wild animal rights. But I think that's a really good point. I would happily change to wild animal rights if it still meant I could have the conversation about how wild animals suffer. Because people think nature is like what they see in storybooks and fucking David Attenborough documentaries. They have no idea about suffering in nature most of the time, at least to the extent that we do.
And then maybe just one more final question. Are we literally talking about moving humans to the ocean like Waterworld? So would you envisage, like that humans live under the sea?
Under the sea.
One day
Like, you know, the Simpsons episode where Homer's like, we're not going to live under the sea, Homer. He's like, envision.
That was classic shit.
I think I think a lot of people would love it. Like, a lot of people love going in submarines, the ocean. So if it came to that part of the technology, I'd live under the sea if it was, viable. But yeah, I can't see it being done without humans.
And Alpha Sophist just asks, is Pat known as in Discord?
Yeah, I'm on Discord. I rarely use it, but I'm on there. So you can ping me if you want.
What's your name on there?
I think it's just Patricia Nonis.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, we'll end it there unless you have anything final stuff to say, Pat. Did you have anything to say just before we end the stream?
No, I'll be in LA in late July, and then Cambridge in August if anyone wants to come say hi.
Oh, and I think someone also asked in the chat if you're going to be at the Australia vegan camp out this year, which I think is in December, but I could be wrong. So are you going to the Australia vegan camp out, Pat?
Oh, at this stage, I'm not sure, but I could.
Yeah.
I haven't made any plans for that yet because I got a lot going on at the moment. But it could be. Yeah, I could.
Sweet. Awesome. And anyone who's coming to the UK one, you can catch me there next month as well. And we would like to thank everyone for joining the stream today. And Pat, thank you so much for coming on and answering some very tough questions that were put forward to you by myself and by people in the chat as well. And thanks for your take on this and for doing what you do to talk about this important issue.
Thanks for your time. And I just want to quickly say I'm really appreciative of you being one of the few vegans to really embrace talking about wild animal suffering. Like, I've noticed you've done that since the topic has come to your attention, and I really respect you for that. So yeah, here's to colonization.
Cheers, Pat, and cheers, everyone. See you later.
All right, see ya.